Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Rode Technics RT-5000. And this one had me intrigued as soon as I saw the images online because it looked so unique. Now, I don't really think it's any secret that aesthetics and build quality are pretty important to me, and I think to you as well. But we all know here on Gazaudio, it's all about the sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Included in the box is the RT-5000. They also supply two different USB cable options, a Type C to Type B and then a Type A to Type B. And there's also a Bluetooth antenna and then a power cord. As far as the price, specifications, features, and design, the RT-5000 comes in at $599. It's an all-in-one desktop DAC and headphone amplifier. On the front, we have three outputs, a 6.35 millimeter and a 3.5 millimeter single-ended output, and then a 4.4 millimeter balanced output. We've also got three buttons. The first button is labeled gain, so its primary function is for switching between the four different gain modes. However, it also has a long press function that gives you access to the 7 different filters. We then have a mute button and then a third button that gives you access to the Bluetooth functions. Then we have a small window with 4 light indicators. The first is the filter light indicator. The second is the Bluetooth light indicator. The third tells you when it's in DSD mode. And then the last light is just the power indicator light. And then finally, we have the volume knob. On the back, we have a Type B USB input, an optical digital input, a coaxial digital input. Right next to that is a little switch that, when in the down position, switches the signal input to Bluetooth, optical, or coaxial. And then in the up position to the USB input. We then have a Bluetooth antenna, pair of RCA outputs, pair of XLR outputs, power switch, and then the power cord input. Now, I need to point out quickly, this is a pre-production unit, and for one reason or another, they decided to use female XLRs, but I have it on good authority that the final production units have male XLR outputs. As a matter of fact, if you look on HiFiGo's website, that has all been updated to reflect the changes, even the photographs they have on there. So just to clarify, if you purchase this unit, it will come with the male XLR outputs, not female. And then moving on to the inside of the RT-5000, it uses dual ES9038 Pro DAC chips. These are really good DAC chips if they are properly implemented. It's the same DAC chip used in my M15S, the Topping D90LE, and many other great products. It also has 10 OPA 1612 op amps and dual Musis 01 JFET op amps. It can decode 32-bit PCM and DSD256. And of course, again, this unit also has Bluetooth 5.1 as well, and it can decode basically all of the more common codecs like SBC, AAC, and aptX, but it can also decode the higher bitrate codecs as well, like aptX HD, aptX Adaptive, and LDAC. It has 4 gain stages: low, medium, high, and then super high. So it has more than enough output to drive most of the headphones out there, but it's also delicate enough to work with IEMs. Now, speaking of output, the RT-5000 gives you a pretty decent amount of power output of both the single-ended and the balanced outputs. Out of the 6.35 and 3.5 single-ended outputs, you get 800 milliwatts at 32 ohms. And out of the 4.4 balanced, you get 1600 milliwatts at 32 ohms. So that's pretty good. It's not quite the levels of the S17, but it shouldn't have any issues driving most headphones, and definitely any IEM. And now I saved the best for last, the design. So first off, this really is a beautiful design and unquestionably a very unique approach as far as desktop devices go that I've seen, as far as the color choices, but also the material choices, because while the main chassis is made of machined aluminum alloy, the top and bottom have a leather textured covering, which looks very, very attractive, and it feels really nice too to the touch. But my favorite part is without a doubt the wood textured faceplate with the gold accents. It's all kind of giving me holiday vibes again, which I love. So I really do find this very, very attractive. Okay, we still have a ton to cover, so let's move on to the sound. So that segment did go a little bit long, so I'm going to try and do my best to go over the sound as quickly, but also as thoroughly as possible. So I tested the RT-5000 with multiple sources, going straight from my PC, using the Matrix Mini i4, coming straight out of my phone, and then I tested the Bluetooth as well, and other different devices. And I also tested it with lots of different IEMs and headphones, like the LCD3 2022, the Aria Stealth, the Elysian Diva, the C-Audio Hakuge, the Monarch MK2 2020 Andromedas for testing noise, and lots of others. Now, speaking of noise levels, the RT-5000 is very, very quiet, even in super high gain mode, again, with my 2020 Andromedas. So if there was any background noise to be heard, those would definitely pick it up. And again, I didn't hear anything, so that's pretty impressive. As for drivability, this will give you about 800 milliwatts out of the single-ended outputs and 1600 milliwatts out of the 4.4 balanced output. And that should be enough to power most full-size headphones. It was plenty for everything that I own. Something that I didn't quite understand, however, was how they structured the gain level output, because in low gain, which is almost what I always have to use with my Andromedas, the output was actually a little too low, and I actually had to turn the volume up pretty much all the way, and I mean up to 100%, just to get the Andromedas up to decent listening levels. And that was out of the 4.4 balanced output. So I ended up just using medium gain, which worked perfectly fine. Again, this is a pre-production unit, so it might be different with the newer full production units. Now, also in high gain, the super high gain mode, the output was super high. Granted, I don't have any really hard to drive headphones, but in that mode, with the headphones that I do have, the highest I could turn the RT-5000 up was about 9 o'clock. So I didn't really have much volume control. So the super high gain mode is definitely going to be for harder to drive headphones. I ended up basically using either medium or high gain for almost all of my IEMs or headphones. Now, as far as the RT-5000's presentation, the sound presentation, it is mostly linear, and it sits basically right in between being musical and clinical. And if it does lean either direction, I would definitely say it's maybe towards the musical side, because while it does seem to produce lots of detail and resolution, it also doesn't really strike me as clinical at all. And the reason I say I think it leans more musical is because there is this sense of a small amount of warmth to its presentation. Not quite as warm as like the S17 Pro, especially in 100 milliamp mode, or the XD05 Pro with the same OPA 1612 op amp. But it did remind me a little of my E70 L70 desktop stack. And I will come back to some comparisons in a bit. So its overall tonality is very good. Instruments and vocals sound natural and just tonally correct. And there's also something about its presentation that had a little bit of smoothness to it. Not that the treble was lacking in detail again, but it just had a nice, clean, easy to listen to presentation in general. Now, speaking of detail and its overall transparency, it's good, especially for an all-in-one device. And I would say in terms of sheer transparency, it came very close to my E70 L70 stack, which is pretty impressive. And I also tested its Bluetooth sound and range, and the sound quality is really good. I always prefer going wired myself because it generally just sounds better, again, in my opinion. And I did find that to be the case with the RT-5000. And I don't really have any need for Bluetooth with my setup anyways, but I needed to test the Bluetooth, so I also tested Bluetooth range. I left my phone in the kitchen, which is on the other side of my house, and I did maintain a pretty solid connection. So the Bluetooth function seemed to work perfectly fine. But going back to the sound, so it's mostly linear, it has good transparency, detail levels are very good, it's quiet, and it has pretty decent amounts of power. But is it worth the $599 asking price, and is it something that might work for you? So for me, right now, the two devices that I'm using at the moment the most for testing IEMs and headphones are the S17 Pro and the M11 Plus, because the S17 Pro is powerful enough to handle pretty much anything I throw at it, and it's linear enough, has good enough technical chops that I feel it can bring the best out of most any headphone. And the same goes with my M11 Plus for IEMs. Of course, there are lots of great options out there under $1,000, but those are just what I feel works best for me. Now, I also have the XD05 Pro, some great topping stacks, an AUN stack, some budget desktop stuff, some DAPs, and a bunch of portable stuff. Now, I also have other desktop all-in-one devices, but most of them are devices under $400. So I can't really compare them with the RT-5000. So I basically had to compare the RT-5000 to the devices within this price range that I had on hand, again, which were just some of the devices I had mentioned. And the RT-5000 isn't going to perform at the levels of the S17 Pro, especially in terms of power output, but also in terms of technicalities and just pure musical enjoyment. But the S17 Pro is also just an amp and $700, so you also have to spend money on a DAC. So maybe that's not a fair comparison, but it gives me a starting point. It's also not going to be able to compete with the XD05 Pro in terms of power output, or even, again, just in terms of pure sound performance and pure listening enjoyment, in my opinion. It's close, but the XD05 Pro just has more power output and it sounds pretty incredible for what it is. And it is technically an all-in-one device, and although it's marketed, the XD05 Pro is marketed as being more transportable, it can also be used as a desktop device as well. That's how I use it all the time. I never take it anywhere other than to my living room. That being said, it's also $800. Now, I feel like the RT-5000 comes close to my topping L70 and E70 combination as far as its technical performance. However, it can't really touch the L70 in terms of pure power output. I do, however, think in terms of technical performance, so detail, transparency, it is comparable to my L50 and E50 stack and my AUN X7S and X8 Magic DAC stack, and maybe even close to the R6 Pro 2. So, to summarize my thoughts on the RT-5000, I do think it's worth the $599 asking price. And here's why. First and foremost, its sound performance is competitive for this price range. I do wish it had a little more power, but it's still more than enough for most headphones and definitely enough for any IEMs. It's mostly linear, it has good transparency, good detail, it's quiet, and again, it has enough power output. And we've established those are the most important things. But when you also factor in that it's an all-in-one DAC and amp with a solid feature set, good build quality, a very unique and really cool design, I think it just makes for a really interesting piece. And again, more importantly, it does sound really good. So that concludes my review of the Rose Technics RT-5000. If you are new to the Giz Audio channel and you like our videos, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.